everyone, welcome to another episode of TCG Talk, back today with another video. And in today's video, I'm going to be going over my thoughts on the upcoming meta for the Pro Tour, as well as the Calling and Battle Hardened, all the upcoming events. Just kind of give my thoughts, not so much a tier list, but more of a discussion point, and just get your feedback as a community. If you like this type of content when you watch it, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Thank you so much for even clicking and stopping by. Feel free to join the Discord down below if you want to be a part of a great Flesh and Blood community. We have over 400 members still going strong. And if you're a long-time supporting member of the channel and you want to maybe support in a different way, check out the Patreon down below so you can get access to my videos even earlier, like a day earlier or so. So getting into it, I thought about doing a tier list for the upcoming events. And usually when I do tier list videos, I make the tier list first, on the back end, make it all and then take it all apart, so I have an idea of where I'm going to put things. And it also lets me reformat things in my head during the video and maybe see things differently than I saw it the first time. Whatever. I noticed that when I made the tier list that it was so top heavy. There was 5-6 decks in. There was no S tier. I only had A tier because I didn't think there was an S tier deck in the format right now. But I do think that there are good decks in the format, and so I decided to kind of put them just in brackets of decks and kind of talk about it. So I have 3 brackets here, 6 total heroes that I think are going to be kind of obvious to everyone, but I want to talk about them and kind of give my thoughts on not where they are currently, but where they're going to be in a month during the Pro Tour, during the Calling, the Battle Hardens, and things of that nature. So the first one, obviously, is Ranger. This is the kind of no shit type one. Lexi and Azalea are both very good decks right now. They're both in the A tier. They're both in the top meta decks. I think the Chicago Brawl proved that if you don't have a game plan against these decks, they're going to beat you. They're going to do well. We had an Azalea mirror in the final. We had a Lexi in top 8 that did really well with a very unique Lexi list, to be honest. If you want to go check it out, the Realm Games put out the deck lists. But Ranger now is an A tier, S tier. Both of these heroes are in the top meta. I don't think there's an S tier deck, but they're in the top. They're in meta deck category. In my opinion, there's 6 or 7 meta decks where any one of those decks could win an event. I could see Azalea. Obviously, she won an event, not a Living Legend event, but a really good event with 100+ players with really high quality, top level players. She can win an event. Lexi can win an event as well as the other 4 heroes that we're going to talk about. Where I think Ranger's going to be, they're definitely going to stay in the top of the meta. I will say, and this is coming from someone who plays Azalea and doesn't play Lexi and enjoys Azalea and has Azalea bias, to be frank, I think that Azalea is going to go down and Lexi's going to go up. I think both of these heroes, not the issue with Ranger, but the thing about Ranger is they can be countered. There's definitely ways to counter the decks, especially Azalea. Not full counter, make her obsolete, but make it easier to play against her with D-Reacts and cards like Reinforce the Line, cards like Oasis Respite, other cards that give on-hit effects, even Uziri using cards like Humble and things of that nature, just things to make her a little bit more difficult. I think that there's ways to kind of target Ranger as a whole that will kind of bring them down just a little bit. Not enough to take them out of the meta by any means. It's not one of those surprise decks that just came out of nowhere, but it is a decks that you're going to have to think about. I do think Lexi's going to end up becoming a little bit more prevalent than Azalea, just by a smidge like this, because I think Lexi's more flexible. And I think with Lexi, when you sit down across from a Lexi right now, you don't know what Lexi you're playing. You could be playing Death Dealer Lexi, like the Ice Lexi, the crazy list that's going around. You could be playing a Fuse list build with Art of War that's just trying to push damage with some decent on-hits. You could be playing kind of a hybrid build with Chilling Ice Veins and Blizzard Bolts, but then also has a lot of Fuseless attacks. You don't know what you're playing. And I think Lexi has the ability to kind of chop and change her sideboard a little bit and switch into it. I think they could go Ice against the aggro decks and then go Fuseless against some of the other decks where they're just trying to push. I also think that Lexi's a little bit better in a Dromai, which I suspect to still be really heavily represented, even though it didn't perform as well as it wanted to in the Chicago Brawl. But regardless, both of these decks are meta. They're going to stay meta. I think it's just you can tech against them a little bit easier, and it might bring them down to earth just slightly. So that's just my thoughts on them. So that's the first batch of heroes. Then we have Ice, the other obvious one. Ice, before the Outsiders meta, Outsiders meta, what little we've seen of it so far was just dominating by 5 to 6 slots per top 8 were taken up by an ice deck, either Icelander or Oldheim, and they're still top of the meta. Ice is really interesting. So, like, the bottom line is they're going to be top decks. They're still going to be in top 8s. They're still going to make top 8s. Icelander, I think, is going to be really interesting if your name's not Michael Hamilton, but we'll talk about that here in a second. We'll talk about Oldheim first. So, before I say what I'm going to say, Oldheim is still going to be a top deck. I'm not saying Oldheim's bad, so please don't come at me in the comments, for the love of God. For Oldheim, I think what is making it more difficult for Oldheim and why you only saw one Oldheim in the top 8 is Oldheim used to have basically no bad matchups, right? For the most part, other than Prism, obviously. But once Prism left, like, Oldheim had no true bad matchups. Really didn't. Every matchup was either heavily favored, like auto win level, it was slightly favored, or at worst, it was a even matchup that required a lot of skill to win. That was like your worst matchups were like 50-50. Now Oldheim has pretty much every matchup. There's no landslide wins, at least from my opinion. If you're a Guardian player in the comments, let me know if I'm wrong. If you look at the meta decks, so like the meta decks right now, in my opinion, are Dromai Dash, Icelander, Oldheim, and then Ranger. The only bad deck in that group for Oldheim is Control Dash, obviously, if they are playing Control Dash, right? Other than that, Dromai, from my understanding, from who I've talked to, it's funny, if I talk to Dromai, they say it's slightly favored. If I talk to an Oldheim, they say it's slightly favored. But for the most part, it seems like this is a really grindy matchup that's not like better or worse for the Oldheim or the Dromai, but it's not an easy matchup. Then you have Icelander, which I think Oldheim is favored into, but normally the matchup goes to time. It's very strenuous. It's a very hard matchup. It's easily losable if you screw up, right? Especially if the Icelander is really skilled, like if both skill levels are even during the match, things of that nature. And then you have Ranger. A good Lexi can beat Oldheim if Oldheim's not careful. And then Azalea can also beat Oldheim if Oldheim's not careful, because Azalea went from being pretty heavily unfavored in Oldheim to still unfavored, but better. Having some tech cards like Boulder Trap and being able to also go taller and be able to get over the top, and even using maybe tech cards like Van Brandt's, being able to do all those things. Oldheim really doesn't have a like just heavily favored landslide win. Even his landslide wins like Katsu now are losable. Katsu can literally combo Oldheim out of the game if they don't ice react properly and they just let Katsu run rampant. There's a couple Katsus who won in the past couple weeks against Oldheim at tournaments. So I think that Oldheim is still a top deck. I just think there's a lot of top matchups right now for Oldheim that's just super, super grindy, and you have to play at a high level the whole entire tournament in order to get top 8. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens to Oldheim. I still think it'll be in top 8. I still think we'll be fighting for top 8s. Obviously, it's going to be a top deck. It's going to be a meta deck. It's something you have to tech for if you're playing, but I think it's just a little bit harder. Then you have Icelander. People can disagree with me, but if your name's not Michael Hamilton, I have a hard time believing Icelander is going to be relevant. I still think it'll be a top deck, but I think it's like if the S tier is Lexi, Azalea, Oldheim, Lexi, Azalea, Oldheim, Dromai maybe, and then I think that's like your S tier. I think your S tier honestly is Lexi, Azalea, Oldheim right now if you made me give an S tier. Then your A tier is like Dromai, Dash, and then like in between A and B tier I think is Icelander if your name is not Michael Hamilton. It honestly would be interesting to see how relevant this hero would be if it weren't for Michael Hamilton, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Right now, there's just so many decks that just piss off Icelander to the point where if she doesn't hot draw Channel Lake Frigid, unless you pilot the deck absolutely perfectly, you're going to lose. The Dromai matchup does not feel good, right? Overall, there have been some ones who've won, but overall, it doesn't feel good. It's really, really bad. The Dash matchup doesn't feel great either, depending on how they play it. The Azalea matchup, basically from my experience, and I'm not even a super talented Azalea player, you don't even like all you have to do is like play your deck and play smart and hope they don't hot draw channel like Frigid, and you're in good shape. When we saw Brody Spurlock beat Michael Hamilton twice, Brody's an amazing player. Like Brody's one of the top players in the world. However, Brody pretty much picked up Azalea on a whim and then beat the world champion twice on his pet deck. So like that just shows you how that matchup is, in my opinion. And then you look at Lexi, and it's still not good in that deck. So if your name's not Michael Hamilton, I wonder how good Icelander's going to be. I think she's going to have to fight for top 8 slots. I think if Michael wasn't at that event, she wouldn't have even saw her near top 8, but that's just my opinion. So I do think out of all these meta decks, she's definitely at the bottom of it, right? If you have Jeremiah Dash, Oldheim, Lexi, Azalea, then it's her. Like I think she's like the 6th or 7th best deck right now, and people might disagree with me, and that's fine, but that's where I see her. And then finally, we have the last category, which is like Jeremiah Dash. Jeremiah's in a weird spot. We'll talk about her in a second. Dash is in a good spot. Dash is really flexible. I think good Dash players can perform really well to be able to swap from control to boost and be able to play like a mid-range game plan or a control game plan. I think it's just a really good deck. It's similar to how Lexi plays, where it can have a toolbox of a bunch of different things, and the deck can ebb and flow with the meta and do really well. Like Dash is just Dash. It's just Dash was, before she got some of her new tools, in my opinion, was like just a good solid deck. And then now Dash is a really good deck. And I think she'll definitely still be fighting for top 8s. It just depends on representation, really, of how good she's going to be. So, or how much you're going to see her in a top 8 format. So we'll have to go from there. Jeremiah's in a weird spot. So Jeremiah at the Chicago Brawl was the most represented deck in the field. It had 15 people registered Jeremiah, of like 100 and something. I think the whole event was like 120 or so, and there was like 15 to 16 registered Jeremiahs. Not one made top 8. There were 2 that were like on winning ends, and they lost, including losing to 2 Azaleas on stream. Jeremiah's in a weird spot because she's obviously favored into Azalea. Regardless of what we saw on the Chicago Brawl stream, she's favored into Azalea. Those 2 Azaleas just played the first Azalea. I forgot who even played on it. I think it was Brody. Was it Brody? No, it might not have been Brody. The first Azalea just like legitimately hot drawed against Jeremiah. Now, that's how card games work, but if I remember correctly, that first game where it was Azalea Jeremiah on stream, the Azalea drew like all the red in the ledgers like over the course of like 5-6 turns, including like a Codex red in the ledger, and like was just destroying off of hot draws. And then Levi, I think, was played and is winning in, played really well against it. So I think overall, Jeremiah's in a good spot against Ranger. Has a little bit harder time against Lexi. Really grindy matchup against Oldheim. She has the same but the same challenge that Oldheim has, where she doesn't have any landslide matchups. Azalea is pretty favored. I would say that matchup, if you made me give a random percentage, is like 65-35 in her favor. But Lexi is not easy because Lexi can use endless arrows and other tools. A good Lexi player knows how to play around a Jeremiah. So that one's very grindy and very hard. The Dash matchup, if they go control against her, or if they just are smart, is a very grindy matchup. The Oldheim matchup, super grindy. Icelander matchup is nice if they run Icelander, of course. That one's a little bit better. But she has a lot of grindy matchups. And then all on top of that, if she ends up getting unlucky and just playing against Briar or Katsu or Phi, unless she's super really talented and draws well, she probably loses because she has a Prism dilemma where she just loses to aggro. So unless you're running like the Empress red build, which can race them down pretty good. Other than that, like she struggles a little bit in the aggro, which also, even though it's not a top represented deck, when you combine Briars and Phis and Katsus, it makes a large portion of the field. Like Briar, Phi, and Katsu are like the 6th, 7th, and 8th most represented deck, but if you combine them all together, it was like 25 registered or something like that of all the decks, which is like a quarter of the field. So if a quarter to a third of the field is aggro, then you still might be in trouble. So it's a really interesting concept. But I think both of these decks are still in the top meta. It's going to be interesting to see how they go. I definitely think Dash will be a little bit more relevant than Dromai, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see a Dromai top 8. It just all depends. So that's where my head's at. Katsu I don't have in the top meta right now until Katsu proves otherwise. It sucks. I do think in the hands of a right pilot, Katsu's the best aggro deck in the format. That's my opinion. People can disagree with me all they want. It's fine. But I do think that. But I also think Katsu has some flexibility issues into some of the top decks and struggles a little bit. And right now, Azalea, unless you just draw bad, just dunks on Katsu. Unless Katsu hot draws his combo really early, Azalea just destroys Katsu, at least from what I'm seeing. Lexi doesn't feel good either when you're playing Katsu. You can race her down if she's running fuseless builds, but if they're smart and they side in Chilling Ice Veins and Blizzard Bolts, it can make your life hell, especially if they're really smart and they side in Shock Charmers and really kind of just discard you out of the game. Jeremiah's not too bad. Oldheim's really tough matchup. Icelander's really tough matchup if they're a skilled Icelander. Dash is not an easy matchup. It's like true 50-50. So is Briar. So Katsu has a lot of weird matchups too. So we'll have to see how that goes. And then my final deck to kind of look out for is Bravo. I think Bravo might actually end up being in a decent spot. I'm surprised because I feel like Bravo is really good in a Ranger because they can just dominate and have good on hits and really affect Ranger's game plan. I also think Bravo's decent into other parts of the format, but we'll have to see. It all depends. I think Bravo is just really grindy, and a lot of people that would play Bravo are just playing Oldheim, which also affects it a little bit. But let me know what your thoughts are. If you agree or disagree. Like I said, I didn't have a tier list. Really, this is just kind of like my thoughts on each like portion of the meta. Just kind of get your idea on what you're thinking. But if you agree or disagree, totally fine. Leave your comments down below. I'd love to get in some discussion with y'all. Let me know what type of content you want to see. I'm going to keep putting out content pretty consistently. Hopefully do some deck techs with some of the top 8 people from Chicago here soon. Talking to a couple of them, so be on the lookout for that. But yeah, hopefully y'all have a great rest of your week. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll see y'all next time on TC Talk. Thank y'all so much.